we have to see others in that light. Because that's the reality of who God is. He loves us that much. And it always has been his desire to bring us back into that state. That restoration is what his desire has always been. Yeah, we were created in perfection and we rebelled, but it's his restoration that we're in. We are in it. It's a process. And so I do want to kind of get back to this message that I started. It's been going on for a long time. I took a break last week. God kind of had another plan. But I feel like he's just instructing us to understand he wants his kingdom in this realm. He wants you and me and this thing called creation to be under his will, under his purpose, to bring him glory. But it's not like he's at this. His desire is not to be glorified. It's to love and to pour out. It's a reflection. See, I think we misunderstand what glory means. To glorify it, it means to honor, to love, and to cherish. That's glory. That's the presence of God. That's why he invades the praises of his people. It's there. He's in us. He desires to be in us. That's the restoration that we're in. And so as we move through this, sometimes I think we forget this is his story, but it's our story. It's our history. It's why we're here. We have a purpose to be here. A very big purpose. To make this place, this thing of creation, the whole earth, all of creation, we're making it like heaven, where it overlaps. That was the intent, and it's still the intentions of God. Why do you think even at the end it says there's going to be a new earth and new? It's not going to be all. He makes it new. A new Jerusalem. He doesn't say, "Oh, I'm going to wipe that Jerusalem off." It's a renewed, a restored in the fullness. That's what his nature is like. He's not destructive. He's not looking to wipe us off so that he can have a clean slate. Isn't that what he promised after the flood? I'm not going to do that again. Why are we waiting for people to get wiped off? Oh God, just whack the bad people so that we can have this utopia. That's not the plan. The plan is to make this like heaven. So as we move through this, we're created to live in a kingdom. We don't just live in a bubble. The kingdom is under one king, and we were created to counsel with God. That's why he made us to be in a relationship. He says, I give you dominion over the earth, make it like heaven. Let's do it together. And we're reclaiming those mountains. We're reclaiming creation. I see it within the 7 mountains, but that's understanding of bringing God's kingdom into each realm because we lost it in the fall. We were created with a kingdom purpose, which in the way I see it is the spiritual and physical manifestation of God's nature throughout all creation. That was the purpose that we were given. Why do you think Jesus would teach us to pray, "Your kingdom come and your will be done"? Where? On earth as it is in heaven. Not take us to heaven, God, so that we can have our harps and our wings and fly around. It's always about kingdom components, and I keep coming back to rulers, citizens, laws, and territories because that's the reality of our story. And see, rebellion changes all of those. It changes every component and affects all creation. The historical cycles, again, from the garden until now, has been perfection, rebellion, restoration, transformation. You can put a reformation, you can put any formation on that, but it's bringing us back to that perfection of the garden. That's why he says we can be just like Christ in this realm. Every rebellion has consequences of curse and death. It just happens. And we've talked about these different invasions. I call them invasions or rebellions throughout our history from the beginning until the coming of Christ. And I'm going to hit some of those. We got to Adam, I think, the last time. We're going to move on past that. But just to recap, the rebellion of Hasatan, which is Satan, as a created being, when he rebelled against God, he was judged. He was. See, spiritual rebellion is eternal judgment. Genesis 3:14 says, "Cursed are you more than," and it goes on. God cursed the spiritual being Hasatan, Satan. You will not find, I have not found, where God curses us, his creation. Now, there's aspects of our nature because of the fall that are more intense. We'll get to that. But in Isaiah 40:15, it says, "Yet down to the underworld you go, into the depths of the pit." He's been judged. He has been condemned. There is no second chance. He has none. Ezekiel 28:19, "You will be cast, you will cease to be forever." Spiritual rebellion, that goes for the sons of God as well. When we get to that one, they have no second chance. They are judged and they are condemned. Adam and Eve, again, when you look at the curses, it is not upon Adam and Eve. Yeah, she is going to have a greater pain in, it's greater. It wasn't like, oh, now childbirth will be painful. It already was, but it was enhanced. But it says, "I will multiply your pain." Cursed is the ground. Ground is where our connection. That's why we are dust. Are we not? Pastor Barry used to call us dirt bags. We are tied to the ground. If the ground is cursed, guess what? It flows. "But both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you." What was on Jesus' head? A crown of thorns to remove that curse. We'll get to that. But again, the ground was cursed. And then in Romans it says that the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him, because we couldn't handle a glorified creation. I think I've said this before. We'd be worshiping butterflies. Ants would be amazing. So we have these rebellions, and they change. See, the rebellions change our structure, those four aspects of kingdom. It changes our laws. We became our self-rule. Instead of having God be our ruler and king, it's now us. The law was good and evil. That's what we ate from, right? The tree, the knowledge of good and evil. Now we can judge. Is it good? Is it evil? We're still using that fruit. Same one that got us kicked out. We changed our citizenship. No longer did we have access to heaven. We were now condemned to this earth, to a realm that was overlapped by heaven. In our territory, they actually got kicked out of the garden, right? But see, a physical rebellion, get a second chance. God's going to redeem all of creation. So we have this sons of God rebellion. We've talked about this. It's where we kind of get those Nephilim things. And we've talked about this before. The impact of this, it can't be overstated. See, I truly believe it's not been taught much because it's such an impactful thing. The enemy doesn't want us to understand this was a monumental event in human history, was the sons of God rebelling and coming into the daughters of men to create the Nephilim, and it defiled DNA. The corrupt spirit beings. We had part spirit, part human, right? They're half-breeds, sons of God, the watchers and the offspring. These created the Nephilim. It corrupted the wisdom and knowledge. They were taught things they shouldn't be taught by the sons of God. All sorts of different witchcraft and alchemy and all these things that they were using. It corrupted the DNA. The Nephilim became what? Giants. And in Numbers it says that they ate the inhabitants of the land. They corrupted and defiled the land and the animals. Remember, we're tied to the ground, right? We're from the dust we come, the dust we return, every animal. But they corrupted beasts and birds and fish. I'm not going down that road. But they corrupted everything. All of creation has been corrupted. Genesis 9:24, when Noah woke from his wine and he knew what his youngest son had done to him. This is homosexual rape, just so we're understood, okay? It was done to him. It was an act that the son perpetrated on the father, Ham. Okay? So he said, cursed is Canaan. Canaan is the third born of Ham's line. All of them were included. But Canaan is a focus. If you look at the descendants of Canaan, all the way through, you will see the commonality of every tribe that Israel comes against. It stems from this line. But what does it say here? A servant of servants he shall be to his brothers. So the descendants of Canaan will serve, or actually says be slaves, to Shem and to Japheth. So they continue on towards this Tower of Babel. They settle on the plain. They refuse to disperse. Now Cush became the father of Nimrod, and again, that is in the line of Canaan. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, therefore is that like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. It actually means he stood up in front of the Lord and said, I'm the greatest. It was literally a rebuke to God. When you think about this, is still the impact of this Nephilim bloodline. So in chapter 10, we've already worked through the first 9 chapters of Genesis. Chapter 10, it gives us a genealogy of these tribes that are from the sons of Noah's sons. And it actually, it gives us about 70 of them. Right? And at the end of each one of these, in Genesis 10:15, it talks about all according to their families, according to their languages, and according to their lands by their nations. So God has separated the generation, these guys into their own peoples. But see, we have this Tower of Babel rebellion because they refuse to what? Disperse. It says, now that everyone at the time spoke a single language, and with one vocabulary, as the people migrated westward, they found a large plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, come, let us unite together and make bricks of clay and burn them until they become hard. So they piled up the bricks they made to serve as stones and collected tar for mortar. They then said, come, let's begin to work to build together a city with a lofty tower that rises into the heavens. They're not trying to get to heaven. What are they building? A tower big enough to withstand a flood. Again, it's another sign of the rebellion. They're saying, God, you flooded us once, we're going to build it tall enough where we don't have to worry about being flooded out again. We'll make a name for ourselves, a monument to us. That sounds like us. Instead of being scattered all over the earth. God said, inhabit the earth, fill it. They're going, no, there's power, and if we come together as one language, one people, there's nothing we can't do. And literally God says that. Historians say they actually put their names on the bricks. Talk about prideful. I can see that. Don't we put names on bricks when we give money to somebody so I can see my name on a brick? Do we have plaques in some churches that have my name on it? I go to Disney, they have blocks and bricks with people's names and stuff like that on it. It's a monument to us. This tower is a ziggurat. It looks kind of four-sided. You'll see even the early pyramids have a ziggurat feel to them if you look at the oldest of the pyramids. But they're building this tower. It is literally a rebellion to God. Everything he has told them to do, no, we're not doing that. So they refuse to scatter. They want to make a monument to themselves to withstand God's judgment. They even use their own bricks. God never told us any of his building is by stone because he created it. Man builds by bricks because it's an honor to them. Nimrod, the rebel, he thumbed his nose at God. He said, I will be the greatest. God says, come, let's go down. And they're confused their language so that they will not be able to understand one another's speech. Let's go down. Again, God is in this. He's a counsel. He's always wanting to do things with others. That's why. But see, this power of language is huge. If we can't understand a language, we're divided. I think I used the example of air flight. That there is to fly anywhere around the world, you have to speak and understand English. Because otherwise, if you fly from Latin America speaking Spanish into Europe speaking English, there's going to be some crashes going on. That's why I truly believe when Spirit comes back, what he said, I'm going to give you one language again. The spiritual language of the Holy Spirit unites us as one language again, and that's the power that is in that. So he confused the language and division. The sons of God, the Nephilim, they're still rebelling. Nimrod is the first of the mighty men. We see this throughout Scripture. The kingdoms of men are established. It says it according to their people and their lands and their nations. The nations are under spiritual authority because God has given them over to the sons of God. He's established them, and these ziggurats are around the world. And this is why it's always, people say there's really no spiritual aspect. It's all just in the Bible. How can you have these ziggurats all over the globe? If we don't understand that there's spiritual entities around the globe, and they go from Indonesia, Cambodia, Africa, Asia, South America, Central America, Mexico, they're all over the globe. Because they all want to be glorified. They want to have, this is the rebellious glorification, and every one of those is based on human sacrifice. Blood. Deuteronomy 32:8, when the Most High God gave the nations their inheritance. He gave the nations their inheritance. When he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the numbers of the sons of God. So they're given over to these other gods. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, the allotted heritage, the promised land. Think about this. If God has established the nations and their people with their language, right? Who's in the promised land if it's not God's people? Squatters. They're squatting. They're rebelling against God. You're going to see this. Why do you think the Amorites and the Hittites and the Jebusites, they're squatting on the land that God has allocated? It's not like the promise was at the beginning. It's not just when he calls Abraham. God says when he sent the nations, he's already declared that's his land. They're squatters. So we're at half point. We go through the first 11 chapters of the Genesis, and we're at the half point of the Bible. The second half is all about the redemption and restoration. Genesis 12 begins with Abram's call and the preparation of the new covenant. And I started talking about Abraham, and the different covenants. I covered that not last week, but the week before. Because see, God is he's preparing this whole time from Abram to Jesus. It's about this permanent covenant that's coming. It's about creating an opportunity for him to come into this realm, allowing his Spirit to come in. And it's not limited. See, the Abrahamic covenant, I'm not saying it's not powerful, but it was limited because what did he say? This covenant is between me and you and your descendants, right? It limited. God's not limited. He limits himself by covenant. That's what he does. God's unlimited. God's everywhere. He limits himself through covenant. And so in Genesis 12:1, now Yahweh said to Abram, leave it all behind. Your native land, your people, your father's household. Leave that kingdom. Leave those laws. Leave those people. Leave that territory. I'm going to create you into a new kingdom. And go into the land that I will show you. Follow me. And I will make you into a great nation. I will exceedingly bless you. bless and prosper you, and I will make you famous so that you will be a tremendous source of blessing for others. So I will bless all who bless you and curse all who curse you, and through you and all the families of the earth will be blessed. Obedience leads to blessing. When we submit to God, the blessings flow. It's not obedience, sometimes it's difficult. So God is establishing his covenant and kingdom with Abraham. He's changing the ruler. He says, I'm going to be your God. You're going to be my people under my laws in my area that I'm giving you. So we have this established. Genesis 15:13 says this. God said to Abram, now for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. Egypt, right? Where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. Obedience leads to blessing. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, and you will be buried at a good old age. Then in the fourth generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. They're the squatters. They're coming back. But think about this. 4 generations. At that time, a generation was 120 years. Think about it. What was Genesis 6:3 says, in how many years am I going to judge? 120. The next generation is going to be judged. 4 generations is 480 years. This is 40 years past. So this is the time frame that God is saying, okay, Abram, this is, I'm telling you now, they're going to come back, but it's 480 years. 4 generations. Get rid of the squatters. Their sin is not fully matured yet. I'm going to kick them out. They have no choice. But I'm still giving them an opportunity. They're squatters in the promised land of Israel. So now we get to Moses. Moses begins the restoration process, and I'm not going to go through everything that Moses does. All right, so it's basically, if you look at this from this process, from Abraham being called out, from Moses being stirred up to lead the people of God, separating them and taking them out of Egypt, it's all about cleansing DNA. He's creating a people that have a DNA that can house Yahweh. That's what this whole process looks like. He's cleansing the corrupt DNA out of creation. And it starts with Moses and Joshua. This is where people will look at God as this harsh God. God that hates creation, that just wants to punish and inflict pain on people. I'm hoping we can get past that. Exodus 1:6 starts with talking about Joseph. But think about this. God says, your descendants are going to be in this land for 400 years. They're going to be oppressed, right? Think about God puts his people in the land and under the authority of the biggest, baddest principalities and kingdom on earth. And his people grow, multiply, and strengthen under this principality. Think about that principality. No, those are God's people. It knows. The Pharaoh's going to be, hey, we got to do something. We got to do something. The next in line doesn't know Joseph, doesn't know what happened. You're talking about, think about this is a post-famine kingdom. Everybody was at their beck and call, at their mercy, because they were the most powerful. Because they had food during this whole famine. And God says, my people right here are going to grow. I'm going to put them under the biggest principality, demon, nation in the world, and they're going to grow. Then Joseph died, and all the brothers and all that generation. But the descendants of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong. Why? They're not intermingling. They were outcasts. They said, go to Goshen. Go to that place over there. We don't want you by us. And the land was full of them. Now a new king arose over Egypt who didn't know Joseph. He said to his people, behold, the Israelites are too many and too mighty for us. And they outnumber us both in people and in strength. Already we see 400 years of being isolated as God's people has changed them. Not under the Nephilim line, but under God's hand. They are already growing physically different. Then Pharaoh charged all of his people, saying, every son born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the river Nile, but every daughter you shall allow to live. Does this not remind you of what happened to Jesus? Why was the 2-year-olds killed? The enemy wants to thwart God's plan all the way. He doesn't know the future, but he tries to predict it and says, man, there's a problem. We need to get rid of it. The corrupt gods and the DNA, they're not getting along. They know there's a battle coming. There's tension. No Hebrew man to cleanse the blood. Think about it. No men. Who has to impregnate women? Egyptians. People from other gods. So the Egyptian gods and Pharaoh want to affect and infect the Hebrew DNA. They want to kill males and birth with women. They're controlling the life and blood of the Hebrews. But it takes Moses to become an instrument of God, just saying, I'll do it. His first attempt was in his own strength, right? He kills a guard that was beating one of them, I think is the story, and he runs off. And so he spends 40 years learning a lot. He becomes an instrument of God. It's not God's going to raise up an army that's going to overtake Egypt to go in and forcefully take these people. All he asked was, tell Pharaoh, let my people go so they can worship me. He didn't even say leave the nation. He just said, let them come worship me. And Moses becomes this instrument. And what's interesting is I don't want to talk about the whole Exodus and all this stuff, but think about this from a spiritual perspective. The 10 plagues. Every one of them tears down an Egyptian god. So the first one is the water turned to blood, right? Happy was the god of the Nile. Frogs from the Nile. Heket, the goddess of fertility. Fertility? Not fertility. It was fertility. Lice from the dust. Geb, god of the earth. Swarms of flies. Kefri, god of creation. And then the death of the livestock and cattle, because it wasn't just cattle, it was livestock. Camels, sheep, goats, horses. It's a lot of dead animals when you're in an agrarian society. Hathor, the goddess of protection, because there was power in these. And when you look at these gods, their emblems that they have on the temples and stuff, every one of them, first one holds the water, the next one actually has a head of the frog. The earth, which is the overarching Geb. Kefri actually has a fly on its head, and then Hathor is literally a cow. So God is picking a fight. Basically, he's going in and saying, okay, each one of these, you believe in your God? Do this. And then the last fight, Isis, goddess of medicine, yeah, you're going to have boils and sores. And what's interesting, when you start going down this list, only the first 3 touched the Israelites. Then God said, no, we're going to separate. Just so you know, it's only going to affect you Egyptians now. Newt, goddess of the sky, yeah, we're going to have hail fall from the sky that burns just the Egyptians. Locusts from the sky, Seth, the god of storms, ate their crops, not the Israelites. 3 days of darkness, Ra, the sun god. That was one of the most, that should have shaken them the most. 3 days of darkness. It was utter darkness. Not the sun went down. Inside buildings, lights didn't work. Okay? Think about that. Oh, I'll just put a candle on, right? No. The darkness enveloped every bit of light. Can you imagine 3 days of just closing your eyes so tightly that it's black? That's what you're living in. Might get my attention. Unfortunately, it comes down to the last one. Because Pharaoh was the law in the land. And the death of the firstborn. So God is taking out each one of these giants. It's not that he likes to work wonders and stuff like that. It's just, I'm going to show you. You have a belief in this God? All right, I'll do that. Then this. And the next one. And the next one. He's just ticking them off. He goes, I am the great God. Exodus 19:4. He's reminding them now, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the people, for all the earth is mine. He's calling them, you're mine. See, this is when I look at a covenant, if and then. If you keep my covenant, you obey me, then you shall be all my possession. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. I can't help but think of 1 Peter when he says that we're called to be what? A chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. We still are. Do you understand? You are a royal priesthood, God's special possession. That's how much he loves us. That's the value he puts in us. When he sees us, that's who he sees. Not sinners. That's not far from him. He sees us as kings and priests. Exodus 20 verse 2 says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, and on the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me. You stop right there. How many generations did he let the Amorites get to before what happens to them? He visits some iniquity, the judgment upon them. God's faithful even when we're not. Even if we are unbelievers, he's faithful. His word is truth. The third and the fourth generation of even those that hate me. But showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commands. So we get to Joshua's warning, right? Now he brings them out through the desert, through all of the trials. I'm not going to go into all of that. But we get to Joshua now. It's time to take possession, right? Joshua warns them when crossing over. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Isn't that really good sound advice? Don't rebel. It's kind of in our nature. It's in our past. We're kind of known to do this. Unfortunately, even when you look forward through the Jewish history of the state, we have this cycle, right? They have a restoration, then they have a tendency to rebel. They go into bondage somewhere, and then they come back. We plead to the Lord, God save us! Yes, okay, we'll reunite. It's a cycle. Do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land. And do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. The first spies went in the land and said, this land devours its inhabitants. It devours. We are like this, small in their eyes. We can't take this. And Joshua's saying, the inhabitants now will be our prey. We will feed on them. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear. What was their protection? The Elohim over them. The God over that nation has been removed. Don't fear. And be aware lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars and all the host of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them. Things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. Others, he's allotted others to worship other gods, other beings, other celestials. Okay? But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people of his own inheritance, as you are this day. More than 160 times in the Old Testament, God proclaims himself to be, I am your God, and you are my people. Why do we think God doesn't love us? That God's some, tyrant. 160 times, but yet we have a tendency to rebel. I love you, but I think I did a message like, how big is your butt? Because God loves us, but he's not going to survive. He's not going to protect us. He's not going to take care of us. God loves me, but he's not going to meet this need. He's not going to do those things. So they're entering into the promised land, right? I love this. I used to love Sports Center. They had a segment that says you had one job, where they would fail to do something in a sporting event. They would wind up losing or something like that. So I entitled this, You Had One Job. When they come into the land that God has promised them, told them, it's your land, I'm going to lead and guide you, you have one job. And this is what bristles a lot of Christians. How can a loving God command him to kill? When the Lord your God brings you into the land where you are entering to possess it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites. Hivites I put in red. We're going to come back to them. And the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and stronger than you, and when the Lord your God delivers them before you, and you defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, and show no favor to them. Utterly destroy. Haharam, dedicated for destruction. Exterminate. Those are specific instructions. Now again, look at this from an eye of the cleansing. He's already said that the Nephilim have defiled all of creation, birds, beasts, fish, humans themselves. So if you look at this from God saying, I have to cleanse this land, otherwise you're going to be corrupted by it and come under its influence, marrying these folks, worshiping their gods, you're going to become just as corrupt as the rest of the world, and that would delay Messiah coming in. If you look at it that way, you see there's a purpose to this. Not because God just wants to wipe nations off the earth. That is not the purpose. Because the reason I had the Hivites, remember, they are, all of those ites, those 7 ites that we're talking about, who's their descendant? Who do they descend from? Ham. Right? It continues in verse 3. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them, and you shall not give your daughters to their sons. You shall not take their daughters for your sons. This is a separation, right? For they will turn your sons away from from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. What was Solomon's downfall? His wives from other nations. God is. You see all this playing out when we think it's just because God's rule God. He just wants to put laws down and make us do stuff. But thus you shall do to them. You shall tear down their altars and smash their sacred pillars and hew down their Asherim and burn their graven images with fire. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people of his own possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. He's segregating why. His desire is to bring the Messiah in through a chosen people because he loves us that much, to redeem all creation. He's calling you a possession, his possession. God knows the end from the beginning. He knows they're gonna fail. All right. Even in Deuteronomy 29:24, it talks about this, and it says, "All the nations will say, 'Why has the Lord done thus to the land?'" Stop right there. He's saying when they turn, when they do these things, when they chase after other gods, when they start putting Asherims and poles and Baal's temples and all this stuff, when they do this, he's going to bring judgment upon them. Why? It's the land. He comes back to the land. He says, why did God do this? Not to the people, to the land. Because we're tied to the land. Why this great outburst of anger? Then men will say, because they forsook the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. It always goes back to, they forgot what he has done for us. They forget. They turned back. They went and served other gods and worshipped them. Gods whom they had not known and whom he had not allotted to them. Those are not your gods. I'm your God. There's other gods. Babylonian gods, Baal, Asherah, all of these other gods, they're not allotted to you. You're mine, I'm yours. This is how this works. He will have to judge them to bring them back. So he forewarns them. And then when they're covering, it's time to cross over, right? The 40 years are over. Joshua's ready to go over the river. When they're crossing it backs up to Adam, a town about 30 miles upstream called Adam. God knows the end from the beginning, right? They're crossing over again. What did Abram do? They actually call him a what? Hebrew, one who crosses over. Joshua and the troops and the nation are crossing over, but God stops this water and backs it up to Adam. Because the redemption has to go all the way back to Adam. Crossing the promised land, what goes first? The ark, right? He said the priests, take the ark and step into that river, and it backs up. Why are they bringing this ark? Why is it so important for it to come forward? In Hebrews 9:4, we learn what's in the ark. Manna, Aaron's staff that sprouted, and the stone tablets that are the covenant, right? So we have God, who is establishing laws in a land with its people. That staff that Aaron's staff, see, I believe Aaron and Moses were one staff. Aaron used the staff that Moses had to do the works. And when he brought him to the temple to find out who's in authority here, bring your leaders with their staffs, and I'll tell you who's in authority. Aaron's staff blooms. It's authority. It's establishing God's kingship. So in this ark, we have this staff. We also have what? The law. And manna is what? God's protection, provision. He's bringing it all before them to understand, this is who I am. This is a physical manifestation of everything I've promised you and told you. That's the power of the ark. It's not the ark itself or the emblems. It's God. These are tangible aspects of who I am. I am your authority. I'm your lawgiver. I'm your protector. I'm going to provide you. I'm your provider. You're my people. That goes first. Oh, almost done. So, the first obstacle is Jericho. And what's interesting about Jericho, and I was reading about it this morning, I don't know, maybe it was just me, but I always thought it was Jericho with one big wall, right? That's what Larry said on VeggieTales. It was just one big wall. But it was a three-tier city. And the first wall was up an embankment that was only about 12 to 14 feet high. Then it had another embankment that went up another 30 to 40 feet with another wall that was about the same size. And then it had a third wall. So if you stood from a perspective of somebody looking, it looked like this wall was about 10 stories. Because it went piece by piece. And so within each one of these tiers, the houses were built around the wall, which is why we read that Rahab let out a scarlet thing and they could crawl out of the wall, because the houses were built around the wall. So it's not like one big wall. So when you think about this blowing of the shofar, the walls were not one big wall. And that's how they could just walk straight up and take the city. But if you were looking at it from a perspective, Satan the liar says this is an impregnable wall. It is 10 stories, basically from bottom to the top tier. And the way if you would look at it, that's how it looked, because it was wall to wall to wall. You didn't see land in between. So it looked insurmountable. The city wasn't all that huge. But think about this. All the surrounding villages probably ran to find shelter when they've seen what the Israelites have done on the other side of the river. So it swelled from somewhere around 1,200 to about 5,000, they said, estimate-wise. So it's packed. So this is the first obstacle in their way. Now, before they lay down, these are the spies. They go into the city, right? Take a look for it. Rahab, they meet Rahab. It says, now before they lay down, she, being Rahab, came up to them on the roof and said to them, men, I know that the Lord has given you the land and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants in the land have melted away before you. That's the fear of God. They know their God has been removed. Their protection is gone. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Shinar and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. The other Elohim will already know. God, they're coming. Did you already see what they've done? If you are a god or a principality or a region, and you know God's coming for you, they're coming. They're coming. I got to go somewhere. I got to go make an agreement with somewhere else where I can go. These are giants. Og was a huge, there were Nephilim in the land, and they utterly destroyed them. What does that mean? Exterminate. They've already done the job. They see this coming. So Rahab understands that. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord, your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth below. Rahab comes under God's protection. She submits to this is your God. I want to be a part of that. And she becomes a woman in the line of Jesus. How redemptive is God can take a harlot and remake them and fashion them and bring them into the genealogy of the Messiah. That's God. That's God. So, why does God demand this annihilation, this extermination? It's about establishing a kingdom. We have to go through that same thing. For us to be transformed on a personal level, it has to be annihilated. Sin has to die. The soulish nature has to be crucified. We have to root out strongholds. This is incumbent upon us. If we don't root out strongholds, what happens? They come back. If anything is left of the old nature, it'll grow back and be a snare. Jesus says in Matthew 5:29 and 30 that if our right eye offends us, to what? Tear it out. If your hand offends you, what? Cut it off. Why? If it leads you astray, you've got to get rid of it. It has to be annihilated. We can't make friends with it. We can't compromise with it. This is where we are in our walk. Numbers 33:55 says, but if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those of them whom you left remain shall be what? Barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall trouble you in the land where you dwell. Philippians 2:12 says, therefore, beloved, you have always obeyed, and so now not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. We have to come into this. We have to root things out. We have to remove the demonic strongholds in us and through us, and it takes a process of effort. It has to be worked out. Worked out, that katergazomai, I'm not really good on the Greek, worked down to the end point. An exact, definite conclusion. We have to work it out. We have to root it out. That salvation is literally, soterai, means welfare, prosperity, deliverance, preservation, salvation, and safety. We have to work that out. It's up to us to root it out, to tear out. God says He uproots and plants. We have to have those things. We cannot make compromises. So I think my last slide, or next slide. Okay. Why does God demand complete obedience? Complete. Because partial obedience is rebellion. If we give up some things, I'll go that far, but not too far. I don't want to be one of those whack job Christians out there. I remember when we were in New Jersey, and I think my wife was talking about homeschooling, and we had some friends that were going to homeschool. I remember going home going, they're wacky. Christians, they're way too far out there. They're going to homeschool. And it took God to put it on our heart to say, yeah, you're going to homeschool. No. She came home and said, James, we're going to homeschool. Yeah, we want to homeschool all of them. But if we say no, if we say no, God, it stops. God is a great God. He loves us so much, He will not break through that no. If we say no, God, you're limited, I'm going to limit you. He's that good. He loves us that much. But we're not automatons where He makes us do anything. He loves us that much. But see, we make agreements. And this was the problem with the Israelites. We make agreements. We compromise with the enemy when we should annihilate him. How about the city of Gibeon? We call them Gibeonites, but do you know that they weren't Gibeonites? They were Hivites living in the city of Gibeon. They made a compromise that impacted them completely. I mean, think about everything that happens because of the Gibeonites. this, what does Joshua say the Gibeonites are going to do? Serve. Axe, cut wood, haul water. They're slaves, they're servants. What did Noah say was going to happen to the descendants of Cain? That they would be servants of who? Shem? It all comes back. It's not God's original plan, no pun intended. But he doesn't miss a thing. They were not supposed to survive. And those Gibeonites will continue to be an issue. I think I'll talk about next week about Saul and his issue with the Gibeonites. And then famine that happens, and we'll get there in a minute. But when I think about this uprooting and having to annihilate everything and exterminate everything, I think about the terror churches where we've allowed churches to grow up with weeds in them that God is uprooting now. They've compromised. They've watered it down. They've made exceptions to be socially acceptable. Unfortunately, we have believers that have done the same thing. Have I made agreements, compromises in my own life? I hate to say it, I have. I know I have. God keeps exposing them. But I would rather have him expose them to root them out. And now is that time, because I truly believe he is rooting out what has been allowed to grow in the church. We see judgment happening. Big names and ministries that are being exposed for, unfortunately, some pretty horrendous activities. But we thought it was okay as long as the anointing flowed. That's not where we are. He is shaking everything. He's uprooting a lot of what has been planted. Because he's coming for a spotless bride. I'm going to close with this scripture from 1 Peter 2, where he calls us kings and priests. But you are God's chosen treasure. Priests who are kings, a spiritual nation set apart as God's devoted ones. Devoted ones means we only have one purpose: to glorify God. Not our own kingdom, our own ministry, our own families, my own whatever. He called you out of darkness to experience his marvelous light. And now he claims you as his very own. We still have this orphan spirit. We run around thinking that we have to belong here. I'm this or I'm that. He said, I am, your I am. If we reflect him, we know who we are. Sons of the Most High God. He did this so that you would what? Not become some beautiful thing on a shelf that you can say, hey, look at me, I did Bible study, I did 2 words, I studied, I read that, I went to service 3 times this week, a prayer group. No. He says that you would broadcast his glorious wonders throughout the world. We're not waiting to get to heaven, to be polished up, to be good enough to be taken up. See, my desire is for you to broadcast my glorious wonders. We have to know who he is as our God and the awesome God he is, to proclaim his glorious wonders to all the earth. That's why we're here. That's bringing his kingdom into this realm. He wants to restore this realm, to restore every aspect of creation, to bring us into that unity with him. And he is doing it in counsel because again, it's about being in union with God. God, I want to see your kingdom come in my family. I want to see them glorified, God, because of your glory. To bring them the glory. When I think about these groups that are happening, I think, guess what? It's the glory that God is pouring out upon us and in us and through us that invades this realm, and we see his presence, and we see things happen that we couldn't imagine. People being healed. Laws being changed. Lives being transformed. Because it's his presence, and when we come together, we manifest it. That's what an ecclesia does. That's who we're called to be. His sons.